Not even 2 weeks after completing my project of recreating all of Security Breach Ruin in Minecraft, Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic has been released. With it comes a brand new environment to explore, which if you're watching this video, means that I have once again taken on the challenge to build the entire game in Minecraft. This time though, I don't need to worry about building another version of the PizzaPlex, as this game takes place inside Murray's costume manor, a mix of a giant factory and storage warehouse, and a whole lot of other things that you would normally find inside a costume workshop. And though it's nowhere near the size of the PizzaPlex, MCM is still just as, if not even more confusing in its layout, with its claustrophobic tunnels and hallways that span across the entire facility. This makes the game feel very overwhelming at first, but with the right amount of planning, I know that I will be able to complete this project. So make sure to subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on so that way you don't miss out on any of it and know as soon as future videos release. Before getting started on the build itself, there's a few things that I want to bring up about this series as a whole to give you an idea of how it's all going to work. As always, I'm using the Java version of Minecraft, currently in version 1.21.1, though I will be updating when new features get added. This project will not include any mods, datapacks, or texture packs to change the build, as I enjoy the challenge of working within Minecraft's normal limits. Now with that said, I will be using mods such as World Edit to help me build, though most of it will still be placed by hand by me. Once the build itself has been completed, I will then be adding in hints of gameplay throughout it, with some examples being working doors, a data diver, or other core gameplay mechanics. Right now I'm purely focused on the build itself, so I'll have a more definitive list of features later on. Finally, as usual with these massive projects, this world will be made available to download for both the Java and Bedrock versions of Minecraft once I've finished with absolutely everything. Of course, this list doesn't go over every single detail about this project, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask me down in the comments. With my general idea of the project out of the way, it's finally time to create a world and start placing down some blocks. But where? Unlike the PizzaPlex, which has standalone attractions, the Costume Manor has many overlapping areas that tightly squeeze in between narrow hallways. It was things like this that quickly added up a lot of inaccuracies in my original Security Breach map, so I wanted to make sure that this time I could get everything in the right place while also staying accurate to the game. So for this project, instead of planning out one room at a time like I've always done, I decided to outline the entirety of MCM all at once. This process took me 6 days to complete, but it was absolutely the smartest way to go about it. There were a few times where I had to start over on finished outlines and even move entire floors around, which would have been completely impossible if I didn't know where other areas were in relation to the current ones. Now while these outlines don't cover the entire game, I've started by just planning out the first 2 floors of the Costume Manor, where then I'll go back and outline the other sections afterward, such as the basements, the mansion, and the exterior. Honestly, this is something I wish I'd done more often, as not only does it tell me exactly what the finished build is already going to look like, but it also gets the time-consuming part out of the way, where now I can just get started filling in these outlines. I'm still going to be doing this one section at a time, so I've come up with a list of what order will be best to work in. So with all of the planning out of the way with, it's finally time to start placing down blocks and get started working on the build. It feels like it's both been 2 years and yet 2 days since the last time I started working on another massive building project like this, which would have been the Ruined PizzaPlex the last time I worked on a mainly building project. That build is nearly 2 years old at the time of this video releasing, but yet I've also been working on it for so long where it doesn't feel like it's actually been that long at all. However, now that I'm getting started on a brand new game that isn't the PizzaPlex, this is a completely fresh take of what I actually get to do. So this is a whole lot more fun than looking at the same PizzaPlex again. Now, though I love Security Breach and visiting the PizzaPlex was my favorite thing to do in the game, it is very nice to finally step away from it after 5 years of working on that build and taking a look at something completely different. You know, Security Breach was full of bright lights and flashing objects. This game is very more toned down and down to earth, with it having grey colours and an industrial look to it. It is a factory after all, and there's going to be a lot more of those grey and brown colours to look at. Now speaking of that, because there are so many objects that are similar to each other, that is why I outline everything in extreme detail. You can see as I'm building, I'm filling in outlines, but I'm also replacing some of the multicolored concrete blocks with certain blocks, and that's because when I outline, I make sure that I am outlining every single individual detail. For example, a 2x2 square of brown concrete can represent a larger box, while a smaller object like a single grey concrete block can represent a trash can. It's things like this that might seem a little overkill, however I really want to make sure that everything has a proper space, that way I can fit in as much detail as I possibly can. This is the exact same way of how I detailed Ruin, where I also did this exact same thing, where it makes everything look messy, but it also makes sure that the build is going to turn out in the best way that it possibly can. Now at the same time, not only do I have all of these outlines to follow, but I also have the game opened on a second monitor, so that way I know exactly what's supposed to be there. It would be a lot harder if I were to just take a guess as to what a random object is supposed to be, but because I have a constant source of reference material to look at, I know exactly what needs to go where and how big it needs to be. So even if the outlines need to change a little bit while I'm building, I still am able to see what is supposed to go there, and I'm able to make any changes if needed as I'm building. Now this is just a personal preference of mine, as I really like knowing what I'm actually doing, but it's very important when recreating a game that you actually know what you're recreating. Already, I have over 100 hours of playtime in Secret of the Mimic, but not only is it just because I was staring at random walls as I'm building, but also because I had to replay the game many times just to get to certain points, as once you beat certain areas, you're not supposed to go back there, meaning I had to replay the entire game again from the very beginning. And not only did I have to do this as I was outlining, but I'm also going to have to do that again later on once I actually fill in the outlines and fill up the build. An example would be the roof section with the big top showroom, where once you get onto the roof, you're able to explore the area, but after that you're not able to go back to it, meaning when I get to that section, I'm once again going to have to start a brand new save, go over to that section, and then pause the game. That way I'm able to look around freely and add in the build as it should be. Now not only do I have the game open, but I'm also using a debug camera, which is something I would highly recommend if you're doing this yourself, where having a debug camera lets you fly around the build freely, that way you're able to see things from a different perspective, and this is very helpful, as not only is this game extremely dark, but it can also be a bit challenging to get into some of those crammed areas. However, since I'm used to this at this point, I've been doing this for over 5 years, and Security Breach was no different. This project has been a lot of fun to work on so far, and I'm curious to see what challenges are going to be ahead later on. It's now been just over 6 hours of building, and already I am really liking how this build has turned out so far. Just in the main showroom, there are so many different colored objects all around that it keeps dragging my eye over to new ones and makes me want to stay in this room and keep looking at it even more. Now what's also helped by it is the fact that this room itself is actually completely pitch black, meaning all of these objects are going to pop out even more, which makes this room feel even more colorful. Now with that being said, with the amount of objects that there are means that I'm going to have to use even more different types of blocks, which can lead to something called block vomit, which is something that I've never talked about before, but it's something that I've seen myself leaning into the more that I start on different builds. Block vomit is the idea of using more than necessary amount of blocks to decorate something, so a prime example would be texturing. So for example, with this floor pattern here, it's mainly made out of wood, however I decided to go all out with it so that way I could capture as many details as possible. So not only do I have 3 different types of wood, but I also have bonus decorations such as these signs underneath some carpets, that way I can get the extra sun rays that would go out from the sun in the middle. Now this technique here is also something that I haven't used in a really long time, where it really is just simply a sign underneath a carpet, where placing the carpet on top of it has a single pixel of the sign peek out from on top of it. This is something that I haven't used in a really long time, but this build has already reintroduced so many different building techniques that I can't wait to get into later on. Another example are these banner patterns for the posters scattered around the build, where I've honestly been on and off with these when it comes to building in different ways. If I wasn't going to add in actual banner patterns, what I would have probably ended up doing is use a mix of blue and yellow blocks as a base, and then add in some signs or buttons on top of it so that way I'm able to get in those extra details. However, by using banners, I'm able to add in all of that detail in just this small space here, where I think it's added a whole lot more to this build and is going to make things stand out even more. So for these examples, this is the poster for the elephant mascot, and this one right here is for the bee mascot. Another place where I've started using banners are for the lockers, where instead of just having it be made out of blocks, I've also added this simple banner pattern here where it represents the bars that would let you see in and out of them. Now obviously these serve no function right now as we're not able to hide in them, and there's obviously no mimic for us to actually hide from, so for right now these are purely just going to be aesthetic. However, once the entire build has been finished, I may go back and add in some proper function to them, where you walk up to it and you're actually able to hide inside the locker and see what's going on outside of it. Another feature that I plan on going back and adding are the mascot suits themselves, which for the time being I've made purely out of blocks instead of using a mix of armor stands. Of course, I could have added in some armor stand models to make them look more accurate to how they're seen in-game. However, for the time being, I really just want to focus on the building side of things, that way I don't need to worry about adding in hundreds of armor stands as I'm going along. Especially with this costume manor having so many of these mascot suits, it could easily start adding in a bunch of lag to the build, so for the time being, I really just want to focus on one thing at a time and stick to the building side of things. So you will have to use your imagination for a little bit. However, if you do know what it's supposed to be, it does get a bit easier to tell what you're actually looking at. However, despite all of this build and all of the messy objects around it, easily the most complicated part of the entire build so far has been the van in the garage. I have not made many vehicles in Minecraft, and I must say, I could have probably done a better job at this. You know, I've spent the last few years building in Minecraft, but for some reason I've never got around to building just simple vehicles like this, so this is probably going to change later on, if not right now, as it's not my best work, to be completely honest with you. I did get the general ideas across, such as the labels along the side and the actual color scheming of it, but I just don't really like the look of it. I feel like I could easily upgrade it by just changing a few things around. I say this a lot, especially at the start of big projects like this, but I make it my goal to always learn something new when I start working on a new build, whether that be using different blocks or using different building techniques. I always want to do something new every time. That way not only is it not the same thing over and over again, but I'm able to improve my building skills as I'm making new projects every time. Despite that though, I'm already having a lot of fun just walking around the place and taking in this environment, as not only is the MCM such a cool location, but being able to experience it in a different game is also something that I find to be really cool. So before I get too distracted and decide to not do anything else, let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be building next. Now, it might not look like we've done too much in the grand scheme of things, however this next part should add in a big section to what we're going for. So up next, I want to focus on building in this main lobby here, as not only is it connected to something that we've already worked on, but it's also in the intro area that we experienced earlier on in the game. Then after that, I'll probably finish up by working on the retail showroom, so that way we can have this big corner of MCM fully completed. I hate to keep comparing this game to Security Breach, but considering that game had been my main source of building for the last few years, I couldn't help but keep thinking about it as I was building this room here, especially the welcome lobby with its bright and colourful walls and floor, but most importantly, all of the colourful posters that line the entire room. All of this is something that we don't really get to see a lot of in MCM, as most of it is more tight and narrow walkways, even if some of them still have some brightly colourful objects. But my favourite part about this room has to be the stripes that go across the entire thing, as it's such a small detail, but it helps to break up the build even more despite all of those giant posters around it. Since most of this is made out of using a single block, just a small thing like that really helps to break it up and makes it a whole lot more interesting. But then to completely contrast all of that, there's another storage warehouse directly next to the lobby, which just has a few shelving units and the elevator repair station that we use to go up to the second floor. And this right here is a reason why I think I'm starting to like Secret of the Mimic just as much, if not even more than Security Breach, as it does a blend of both those bright and colourful rooms, but also the industrial ones much better than Security Breach did. Now, Security Breach still had all of those basements and the utility tunnels, but you had to go from one side of the building to another just to be able to really see that contrast. Now, Security Breach did an amazing job with what it was trying to do, and I love the Pizzaplex, but there's something about the MCM doing this blend much better that I really like, as you don't have to travel so much just to be able to see the different things that go around the place. This game is still set in a factory after all, but it doesn't hold itself back when it comes to some of those colorful rooms just like what we see in Security Breach. But something that I'm just thinking about now after rewatching this time-lapse is something that Security Breach doesn't do, and that's nice ceiling decorations, as most of Security Breach is so large that the ceilings just end up being covered in pipes and other mechanical pieces. Rooms like this actually are able to have much more detailed ceilings because we're actually able to see them. With this build being much smaller and much more self-contained, it's able to put in some of those smaller details that once again help complete a build and make it look so much better. And this also carries over to the retail showroom, which while it doesn't have the bright and colorful yellow walls that the lobby does, it has a more down-to-earth and more believable color scheme to it. Instead of having tiled floors, it now has just wooden floors and walls, while also still having hints of decorations around the place, like posters, like the banners, they also line along the walls here, as well as all of the mascot suits. This room probably has the most amount of mascot suits in the entire building, which does make sense with it being a retail showroom. The hint there is in the name of it. But this has ended up being one of my favorite rooms to build so far, just because of the blend. It's really nice to get a nice blend of all of them together. I keep saying that, but throughout this entire building process and throughout my channel of building different things, it's either been one extreme or the other. I haven't really got a chance to mess around with the two things together. It's always been bright and colorful rooms, or it's been dark and gloomy basements. Now, while this build also has both of those, we just saw that with the welcome lobby, it will also have those dark basements with, say, the nurse hospital that we see later on in the game. But with the amount of things going on here, it's still really fun to look at. It's very messy, but when you're able to just take it all in at once, it's still such a fun build to look at despite everything that's going on. This is something that I've once again found myself enjoying when it comes to building, is not focusing on one individual object, but instead looking at the room as a whole and taking it in all as one big picture, which I do think helps a lot when it comes to building in Minecraft. But when you're recreating something, it's nice having that already done for you, and it honestly makes it a lot less work heavy. It's just fun to just turn off my brain, place down blocks, and if it looks good, I go with it, and if I think something else should go, then I'll just replace it. It's always fun messing around with things and testing things out. Nothing is ever done the first time around, but that's honestly something that I really enjoy when figuring things out in Minecraft. And that's where I'm going to leave all of the building for the time being. You can see we've already made some decent progress with the grand scale of the project. Maybe about just under a fourth of the first floor has been fully completed. We still have a long ways to go, but already a lot of progress has been made, and I am very happy with how all of it has turned out. I actually just want to go ahead and quickly talk about this merry-go-round here. I didn't manage to talk about it during the time-lapse. This is once again just like a really small feature that I'm really happy with how it turned out. I don't get many opportunities to build things like this, and I think that's another big reason as to why I enjoy recreating things in Minecraft as opposed to just my own things. I'm normally a boring person, and when I build my own things, they usually tend to be around the same types of blocks. But with things like this, I'm able to go beyond my comfort zone and take a look at things that I wouldn't normally do, and it makes me really excited to see all of it come together. Even in these much smaller rooms, it's still really fun to just walk around the entire place, despite the fact that there isn't any added gameplay for the time being. We're still able to go into all of the different nooks and crannies and explore all of these back hidden hallways, like this one right here just above the elevator, which was a super cool find the first time I played the game, and I really like how this all turned out as well. It still feels extremely claustrophobic, and we're able to crawl all the way to the other side, find the drop down zone where then we would be able to get our present, the log, and then we would be able to escape by using the crank on the wall here. I was also able to find another place to use the signs and carpet technique for a continuation of the lines along the floor. For a quick moment they go on the floor and then continue back up and wrap around to the elevator. Now obviously, since I'm not able to put banners on their back on the floor, I had to use bamboo signs and orange carpet to make it look like there's a thinner line going through the floor right here. Now, a slightly controversial building opinion I had at the start but has slightly started to grow on me are using buttons on the floor. This is something I'm usually against just because it stands out a lot. However, the carpet pattern here is very out there and not very normal, so I wanted to mess around with different things and see what worked. Something that I am pretty proud of though is this small statue here of the Cleanovac. Now despite the fact it is much bigger than it's supposed to be as in game, I did have to work with an even amount of blocks as this entire build is centered around 2 blocks. So I really had to mess around with different combinations of staircases, walls, fences, signs, things like that to make this statue come together. And honestly, I think this turned out really well. For being a smaller 2x2 statue compared to the giant things you see in Rockstar Row, I really like how this statue turned out, and it just gets me even more excited to add in the actual Cleanovacs later on. And one more thing I want to bring up quickly is that I did actually go back and touch up the van. Instead of it being 4 blocks wide, it's now only 3 wide, and I also changed the way that the window shield looks. So instead of using a mix of black concrete and staircases, I decided to just go all out with black concrete. So it has a more boxy look to it. However, I think that it still keeps the look of how a van should be. It looked too sleek with those staircases, and I think that doing this makes it look much better. It's still not perfect, however it's definitely a step in the right direction. And if for some reason you're wondering if there's an interior to this build, I guess this counts. In just under the span of 2 days, this build has already gone from being a mess of outlines to slowly starting to take shape with fully completed rooms. This has already become one of my favorite projects to ever work on, and I've loved being able to use different building techniques that I've never used before. It's always a great feeling to start new on something fresh, and with how much I enjoyed playing through Secret of the Mimic, it just gets me even more excited to see how future areas are going to turn out. So make sure that you're subscribed to the channel with notifications turned on, so that way you don't miss out on the rest of the series. But with that being said, thank you everyone so much for watching, and I will of course see you in my next video.